That afternoon, the downtown traffic splashed through rain puddles on the street, spritzing me as I rushed toward the psychic studio on Main Street in Bloom. The psychic shop blazed on the corner in neon glory, illuminating the street with incompatible shades of red. Bells chimed as I entered. Inside, red sequin disco lights, the size of pumpkins, swung from the chipped ceiling, emitting a pinkish glow into the closet-sized space. To the right, a burgundy velvet curtain separated the waiting area from the psychic's chambers, clashing with the faded red shag carpet that looked like it had been stripped from the floors of a condemned motel circa 1970. Oh God, I thought. Am I really doing this? A small voice interrupted my reverie. "May I help you, sir?" he said, his voice thick with an accent I couldn't trace. I smiled, buttoning my umbrella shut. I dried my hands on my coat and nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I want to make an appointment with..." I pulled out my phone, then scrolled down to the contact Josh had sent me when he insisted that I come here. "Ah, here it is. Esmeralda?" I said, feeling awkward. I scanned the room for familiar faces, hoping not to find any, but I was the only customer. I had never been to a psychic. I felt ridiculous, but Josh said I had to see the psychic because she wasn't just any psychic. The man nodded. Good, he said. A broad, eager smile spread across his face, revealing a missing front tooth. Plus, I admit, after hearing Josh's story, I was curious about this place. And then, of course, today was the anniversary of... "Esmeralda is very good," the man said, interrupting my thought. He stood about as tall as my chest, barely tall enough to see over the cash register. His head bobbed around as he spoke. I nodded, but I had to laugh at his enthusiasm. "Yeah, that's what my buddy said." The man glanced at the clock. "Esmeralda will see you in 20 minutes. I shrugged. "Yeah, sure, why not?" Good. He smiled. After I paid, he gestured me toward the empty burgundy chairs in the waiting room. "Please, have a seat." As I searched the crowdless room, I couldn't help but wonder, if this lady is such a master, why doesn't she have more customers? You'd think she'd have a longer wait list. After what seemed like an eternity, the burgundy curtain parted, and a short, portly woman in her mid to late 50s appeared. She wore a long burgundy gown, and her long gray hair was swept into a messy bun, secured to the top of her head with a pencil. Every finger on both hands glittered with jewels. She smiled when she saw me. "You must be Nick," she said, her voice warm. Wait, I thought. I didn't tell anyone my name, did I? She motioned towards me. I followed her past the curtain down the hall to her reading room, then gasped. Wow, I thought, grimacing at the explosion of kitsch decor. It was an interior designer's nightmare. Red gypsy Tiffany lamps stood on the side table next to a splayed deck of tarot cards, glittering candles and crystals, red-headed Hummel figurines, and other knickknacks. The room looked like a Christmas display gone awry, as though a drunk angry reindeer had thrown up. I sat at the large round table, where a candelabra stood in the center, surrounded by smaller golden red candles. Esmeralda took a seat across the table and gazed at me, her blue eyes soft and maternal. "Now, tell me what kind of reading you would like," she said. She must have sensed this was all new to me, because she chuckled at my expression. "Let me explain," she said. "I do tarot readings, where I read the cards that tell you about a life problem. And I do palm readings, and I do medium readings, where I summon the deceased to speak through me. That's the simple answer. So, during medium readings, can you summon anyone?" She nodded. "Pretty much," she said, "unless they don't want to talk. That's happened before, but not often." She studied my reaction, then flashed a knowing smile. "That's what you want, isn't it?" she asked, her voice gentle. She paused, shuffling a deck of cards. Then, is your loss recent? My stomach fluttered. Was it that obvious? It isn't that recent, I said, avoiding her gaze. She set aside the tarot card she had been shuffling and reached for my hands, taking me by surprise. Her hands were warm and maternal. A strange energy coursed through my hands as she held them. I want you to know that your mother is okay, she said. A thread of tears burned in my eyes, but I fought them back. I wasn't going to be that guy. Today is a special day, isn't it? She said, but she already seemed to know the answer. I nodded. Today is the first anniversary of her death, I said, looking down at the worn red carpet. She nodded, sympathetic. Here is what we do, Nick, she said. I light a candle and you close your eyes. I guide you through a meditation, and then when we ask your mother to join us, all you have to do is follow my instructions and tell me what images come up throughout the meditation. Okay? Okay. But before we start, there are 3 things you should know, she said. 1. Always keep your eyes closed unless I tell you otherwise. 2. If you feel overwhelmed, tell me and we'll stop. 3 is the hardest, but you should know. What is it? Sometimes they change, she said. What do you mean? She shrugged. Just like we grow and change. Well, our deceased loved ones do too. Usually, it's not a dramatic change, but you should be prepared. The thought concerned me, but it didn't sound like I needed to worry too much. Did I? Before I could think about it, she continued. She smiled. Ready? I nodded. Yeah, let's do this. Remember, she said, keep your eyes closed. I didn't bother to ask why. Just follow my voice. I settled into my seat. Close your eyes, she said, her voice gentle like the spring wind. I obeyed, and I listened. A match sounded, and the scent of lavender filled the room. Light, invigorating, relaxing. A click sounded from across the table. Then a soundtrack played at a low volume. Ambient nature sounds, with rushing waterfalls and rhythmic chanting. It was just loud enough. Breathe in, she said, her voice low and soft. And breathe out. I inhaled, then exhaled. Again. Breathe in and out. I relaxed, melting into the sound of her voice. Let the images come, she said. And they did. Imagine you are traveling through a tunnel. A long, dark tunnel with a soft white light all the way down at the end. This tunnel is taking you back in time. Back in time. My body relaxed, growing heavier with each breath. I breathed again, deeper and deeper. I followed the tunnel toward the light, going back and farther back. In time, the house appeared. Where are you now, Nick? My parents' house, I said. I described their white stone house with ivy climbing up the walls and the greenhouse in the backyard. Tell me about the greenhouse. I described each image as it surfaced. It's all glass, filled with plants, and tons of ivy. And inside the greenhouse, a shovel is propped up against the wall. I see it when I walk inside. Good, Nick, she said, reassuring me. Now, what else? At first, it doesn't look like anyone is there, I said, seeing snapshots of that day again in my mind. Stunned by the clarity of the images, the detail was so vivid, so crisp. Then, I see my mom's purse on the ground, tipped over, with all her belongings spilling out. I call her name, but nothing. Then what, Nick? Then I hear someone groan from the back of the greenhouse. I said, I don't see anyone around, but I hurry toward the sound, following it, calling for her. Mom? Mom? But nothing. And what happened next? Then I find her in the back, curled up on the ground. She's clutching at her chest but can't speak. I panic, breathless. I grab the phone and dial 911. Then what, Nick? I can't keep her awake. My voice broke. I paused. I tried to. By the time the ambulance comes, I could have. No, Nick, Esmeralda said, reassuring me before I had even finished my sentence. You couldn't have done more than you did. It was her time. You see? The hot sting of tears returned, but I fought them back and kept breathing. But she is with you, Nick, Esmeralda said, and she is here now. She says she wants to speak with you. Is that okay? I nodded. Okay, Nick, Esmeralda said. Keep your eyes closed as I perform this next step. I nodded again. Something rustled. Then the scent of jasmine wafted through the air. Esmeralda hummed and chanted. I waited. Barbara May, she said. We ask you to join us, Barbara May. Your son Nick has asked you to join us today. Speak through me, Barbara May, she said, conjuring her spirit like a magician. I listened, with my eyes shut. Never mind that I hadn't told her my mother's name, or even my name for that matter. At this point, I no longer cared how she knew the things she did. As I waited, the energy in the room shifted. A chill pierced the air. I shivered. When Esmeralda spoke, I froze. Instinctively, I knew Esmeralda wasn't the one speaking anymore. Esmeralda was gone now. Nick, the voice said, her voice soft and careful, as though trying not to frighten me. I knew that voice. I had always known that voice. It was the first voice I had ever heard. A whirlwind of emotion tumbled through me. Mom? I kept my eyes shut, just as Esmeralda had instructed, and I waited. It's me, Nick, she said. I wanted to open my eyes, but a part of me was too afraid of what I might see. Nick, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I've missed you, sweetheart. My eyes burned again, but I fought hard, holding back. Why did you leave, Mom? I asked, forcing back the emotion. She sighed. I didn't want to go, Nick. Believe me, I didn't. Then why? I started, but knew the question was of no use. Listen, she said, her voice sounding firmer, more insistent. I need to tell you something while I'm here. What is it? She sighed again, as though contemplating whether to tell me something. As I waited, my heart fluttered in my chest. Honey, she said, sounding nervous. What is it? I asked. Is something wrong? This is ridiculous, I thought. Why can't I open my eyes? But I had promised Esmeralda. Nick, she said, I'm not happy here. Something in her voice. It didn't sound right. What do you mean? I asked, my anxiety growing. Something didn't feel right. I tried to ignore it. This place, she said, the pitch of her voice rising. Oh, Nick, it's so dark here. Her voice lowered, then deepened. It's so dark here, Nick. Chills swept over me. Goosebumps raced up my spine like electric tickles. This didn't sound like my mother anymore. This couldn't be my mother. Then I remembered Esmeralda's warning. Sometimes they change. I've done a bad thing, Nick, she said. An ominous tone leaked from her voice, as though she was harboring a secret. What? What are you talking about, Mom? I asked, even though I wasn't sure this was my mother. I've done a terrible thing, Nick, she continued, sounding agitated. What did you do, Mom? I asked, not wanting to know. Just know that I did it out of love, she said. He had nothing left to live for, but I could hear the lie in her voice. I couldn't stand the loneliness, she said, her voice thick with desperation. I found a pickaxe and... No, I shouted, but she wouldn't stop. I had to, Nick, she said. I was so alone. What did you do, Mom? I asked, my heart racing and thumping like a juiced-up gymnast in my chest. What did you do? I didn't want to hurt. She tried to sound apologetic. Then her voice trailed off. My stomach churned. Esmeralda, I begged. I need you to come back now. But nothing. Esmeralda, I shouted. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to open my eyes. But what would I see if I did? But my mother kept speaking. Nick, I have 3 warnings I must give you before I leave, she said, sounding unfazed by my terror. I don't want to know. I pressed my hands against my ears to tune her out, but I couldn't. She spoke louder, sounding more authoritative. 1, she said. The body is buried behind the garage. Look for the fresh mound of dirt. No, I shouted, sobbing, imagining my poor father. 2, she continued, her voice unwavering and merciless. Don't climb on rooftops or you'll get hurt. Stop, I shouted. What was she talking about? And 3, she said, ignoring my protest. I'm sorry, Nick, but a much, much worse fate awaits you. That was it. I couldn't resist it any longer. I had to look. Without a second thought, I opened my eyes, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Standing in front of me, in all her dead glory, was my mother, but not the mother I had loved and remembered. This mother was gray-skinned and wild-eyed, her once blue eyes cold and steely, her cheeks gaunt, her eyes sunken. Her once silky blonde hair was coiled into a gnarled gray mess. She stared at me, unblinking, like a grotesque statue. In her eyes, I saw the absence of everything that should have been in a mother's gaze. Esmeralda, I shouted. Come back. I want this to end now. But my mother kept talking as though she hadn't heard me. I'm sorry it had to end this way for you, Nick. And how? I asked, not wanting to know, but needing to know. But with that, the room went dark, and the candle flame blew out, as though extinguished by some phantom breath. A moment later, the light flicked back on, and Esmeralda stood in front of me, calm and serene, as though she hadn't heard or seen a thing. What was that? I asked. What happened to my mother? Esmeralda shook her head. Sometimes they change. As I drove home after the reading, I crept down the freeway at the speed of a geriatric heading to a bingo game after church. I was too afraid of what might happen. The speed limit was 60. I drove 35. I ignored the many people who honked at me and gave me the finger. When I got home, I texted my dad, but never heard back. I was too afraid to go to his house, even though I wanted to. I tried to convince myself that my psychic reading had all been some elaborate mind trick. The next morning, I called Josh, but he didn't answer. Minutes later, I got a call from an unknown number. The deep voice of a stranger replied on the other end. Nick May? He asked. Yeah, afraid I've got some bad news. What? Is your father Jerome May? Yes, I said, feeling sick with anticipation. I'm afraid he had an accident. Fell off the roof doing some home repairs. Happened about an hour ago. Wait, what? Then who was buried behind the garage? I wondered. What the hell? What happened? A neighbor reported a strange noise coming from your father's home, he said. Said he heard a man scream. After he called the station, we sent law enforcement to the scene. When the officer got out of his vehicle, he heard the voice of an older, unidentified male subject calling from a bush on the property. He headed toward the sound and found your father there, incapacitated. Incapacitated? I asked, confused. Yeah, broken arm, he said. Might want to head down to the hospital for a visit. Is he going to survive? I asked. Probably. As I dressed to go to the hospital, I flipped on the TV and listened to the news. A breaking news story interrupted the usual morning program. "Breaking news," a news anchor said. "This just in. Around 5 o'clock this morning, police responded to an anonymous tip that a body had been buried in the backyard of a home in the quiet Dover Hills neighborhood, located on the southeast corner of Hammond Street and Trinity Avenue. Once on scene, police discovered the body of this 20-something male, buried in a shallow grave. When the picture appeared on the screen, I dropped my coffee. Josh," the anchorman continued, "this man has since been identified as 25-year-old Joshua Williams, but I didn't hear the rest. I thought back to last night. 2 out of the 3 warnings had already come true. I grew restless as I replayed my mother's words. A much, much worse fate awaits you. Now, I can't help but wonder what happens next."